Hello, this is a reading for Water Never Hurt a Man by Walter D. Edmonds in your textbook on page 430. He trudged with his hands tight fists in his pockets, his head bowed to the wind and rain. Ahead of him in the darkness, so that he could hear the squudge of their hooves, the towing team bowed their necks against the collars. He could not see them in the darkness. When he lifted his face, the rain cut at his eyes, and when lightning split the darkness, he shut his eyes tight and pulled his head closer into his coat collar, waiting blindly for the thunder. Once in a lull, he looked back. He could barely make out the bow lantern and the arrows of gray rain slanting against it. Between him and the light, he caught glimpses of the tow rope, dipped slightly between the team's heaves, and he roughened water in the canal. Somewhere back of the light, his father stood by the rudder sweep, his beard curled and wet, his eyes slits, sighting for the bank. John wanted to go back, wanted to tie by for the night, wanted to be in the bunk with his head buried in the friendly, musty smell of the blanket, where the storm could not reach him. He had gone back once, but his father had reached for his belt, saying, "Go on back. Water never hurt a man. It keeps his hide from cracking." John had gone back to the team. They did not need his guidance, but it was his place to keep the rope from fouling if a packet boat coming their way signaled to pass. He was afraid of his father at night, afraid of the big belt and strong hands with hair on the fingers over the knuckles. He caught up with the plodding horses and let the rain have its way. At each stroke of lightning, his small back stiffened. It was his first year on the canal, and he was afraid of storms at night. He had been proud that spring when his father said, "John's old enough to be a driver, boy. He's coming along with me in the Bacalona." He had shown his dollar to his brothers and sisters, first pay in advance, and his father had brought him a pair of cowhide boots from the cobbler when he came to the village. Later, when the frost was out of the mud, John would go barefoot. He was proud of his father. In Westernville, with other small boys, he had heard the dock loafers talking about his father, George Brace, bully of the Black River Canal. In some strange way, they had news of every fight his father fought a day after it happened. George licked the Amsterdam bully Wednesday morning, LAC 59. It took 19 minutes only. George is a great hand. Then Big Ditch Bezabors is learning about George. A stranger had said, "Wait till Buffalo Joe meets up with him." There was silence then. Buffalo Joe Buller. He was a bully of the western end of the Erie, a pea souper, a Canadian. He fought the Erie bullies down one by one, and when he licked them, he marked them with his boot in the Canadian style. It had a cross of nails to mark the beaten man's face. "You wait," said the stranger. Little John, listening then, felt shivers down his back. But now, with the wind and rain, the lightning tumbling the clouds apart, he forgot. They were on the long haul to westward, to Buffalo, with clothes aboard, full drafted in Rome. They had to leave 300 weight on the dock. He felt his muddy boots slip in the towpath. He heard the squelching of the horses. Squelch, squelch, a steady rhythm as they kept step. Once the lightning caught his eyes, and he had a clear view of trees beyond the canal-side meadow, their budded twigs bent down like old women with their backs to the storm, and the flat, sharp wall of a canal house, 60 yards behind him. He had not even seen it as he passed. The rain was finding a channel down his neck. It crept farther, bit by bit, with a cold touch. He could feel his fists white in his pockets from clenching them. His legs ached with the slippery going. They had supper at 6, tied up by the bank, and John had eaten his plate of beans. They had felt sleepy afterward, barely noticing his father's big body bent over the dishpan. It was warm in the cabin, with the little stove roaring red hot and his small hat hanging beside his father's cap on the door. He had been almost asleep when his father's hand shook him roughly, then tumbled him from his chair. "Get out, John. Them clothes we've got has get west for spring plowin'. We'll pick up Bob in Syracuse, then we'll have a better chance to rest. Get out now." And he had reached for his belt. What did John care for the old plows anyway? But it hadn't then begun to storm, and he had gone with a tired sense of importance. One had to keep freight moving on the old Erie. The old Bacalona always made fast hauls. He had been proud and shouted in a high voice to the tired horses, and kicked one with his new boots. But now he did not care about the plows. He wished the crazy old Bacalona would spring a leak in her flat bottom, so they would have to stop till the hurry-up boat came along and patched her up. He thought of her now, bitterly, with her scabs of orange paint. "Crummy old blister," he called her to himself, and made names to himself, which he said aloud to the horses in a shrill voice. He was only 12, with all the bitterness of 12, and the world was a hateful thing. A water rat went up the towpath with a splash, and a frog squeaked. He glanced up to see a team on the opposite towpath heading east. "Hey there!" yelled the driver in a hoarse voice, but John was too tired to answer. He liked to yell back in the daytime and crack his whip, but he had dropped his whip a while back. He would get a licking for that in the morning. But he didn't care. To hell with the whip and the driver and Pa. "Hey there!" shouted the other driver, a voice in the rain. All right, you dirty pup. Eat rain if you want to go drowned." The rain took the voice, and the boat came by silently, noiseless as oil, with its bow light a yellow touch against the rain. The steersman gave a toot upon the horn, but the sound bubbled through the water in it, and the steersman swore. They were still on the long level, alone once more. It must be midnight. If only the LAC would show. In Syracuse, Bob would come. He took turns driving and steering and cooking, a little man with a bent shoulder who had dizzy spells once in a while. At the LAC, John could sit down and rest and listen to the tender snarling at his sluices while the boat went down, and heaving at his gate beam, while John's father heaved against the other. He was crazy, the lock keeper was. All lock keepers were crazy. John's father always said so. John had seen a lot of them in their week of hauling, but he did not see why they were crazy. They looked no different, even if they were. He hoped the lock keeper would be asleep, so it would take a while to wake him. Squelch, 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 squelch. The horses kept plodding. Suddenly John caught a break in the rhythm. One foot sounded light. He pushed his way up beside them against the wind and laid a wet hand against the side. He could not see, but the side felt hot and wet, and he got a smell of sweat. Yes, he could feel the off-horse limping. Hope filled him. He waited till the boat came up, where he was a small figure, shrunk with cold. The boat's bow, round and sullen, slipped along, the bow light hanging over and showing an old mullein stalk in silhouette against the water. "Pa!" His voice was thin against the wind. He saw his father's figure, rain dripping from the visor of his cap, straight and big, almighty almost, breast to the wind. "Pa!" The head turned. "Hey there! What you doing? Get on back, or I'll soap you proper." "Pa, Prince has got a limp in his front foot, Pa." The voice turned hoarse with passion. "Get on back, you little pup. 59's just round the next bend. Take your whip and tar him, or I'll tar you proper." John sobbed aloud. For a bare moment he thought of staying still and letting the boat pass on. He would run away and join the railroad. He would get run over by an engine there, just when things went well, and they would be sorry. He started to draw himself a picture of his body coming home in a black box, and his mother crying, and his father looking ashamed and sorry. And then the lightning made a blue flare, and he saw the straight figure of his father ahead, on the Barcelona, which seemed struck still, a pillbox in the flat country, and he was afraid and went running desperately, hoping he could get back to the team before he was missed. He caught the horses on the bend, and lifting his face to the storm, saw the lock lanterns dimly ahead. And even then his ears caught, coming up behind him, the harsh blast of a tin horn. He looked back and saw a light, 2 rope lengths behind the Barcelona. Even while he watched over his shoulder, he saw that it was creeping up. "John!" His father's voice beat down the sound of rain. "Lay into them brutes and beat into the lock." He could imagine his father glaring hack. He could imagine his father glaring hack. If only he had not dropped his whip, he would have liked to ask his father for the big bullwhip that cracked like 40 guns, but he knew what would happen if he did. He shrieked at the horses and fumbled for a stone to throw, but they had heard and recognized the note in his father's voice, and they were bending earnestly against the collars. A sudden excitement filled John as his father's horn rang out for the lock. The wind took the sound and carried it back, and the other boat's horn sounded a double toot for passing. John yelled shrilly. The horses seemed to stand still, and there was an odd effect in the rain of the canal, sliding under them inch by inch laboriously, as if with his own feet he turned the world backward. Minutes crept at them out of the rain, and the lights of the lock did not seem to stir. Then John heard the squelching of the team behind his back. Little by little they were coming up past the Barcelona, until he could hear them panting through the rain, and saw them close behind dim puffs of steamy breath. He watched them frantically. Then the lightning came once more, a triple bolt, and the thunder shook him, and when he opened his eyes once more, he saw the lock lanterns 100 yards ahead. At that instant, the driver of the boat behind yelled, "Haw!" and the following team swung across his tow rope, and they were snarled. The horses stopped of themselves, shuddering. They were old hands, and knew enough not to move, for fear of being thrown from the towpath. The boats came drifting on placidly as waterlogged sticks. The light of the following boat showed a dark bow coming up. John heard his father roaring oaths, and saw by the bow light of the other boat a tall, clean-shaven man as big as his father crouched to jump ashore. Then both boats came in by the towpath, and both men jumped. They made no sound except for the thump of their shoes, but John saw them dim against the lantern light, their fists coming at each other in slow, heavy swings. The strange team was panting close behind him, and he did not hear the blows landing. There was a pushing upward in his chest, which hurt, and his fists made small balls in the pockets of his trousers. The other boater and his father were standing breast to breast, their faces still, cut, stone-like things in the yellow light, and the rain walling them in. He saw his father lift his hand, and the other man slip, and he would have yelled for all his cold, if the lightning had not come again, so blue that his eyes smarted. He doubled up, hiding his face, and wept. A hand caught him by the shoulder. "A little puny girly boy," said a voice. "I wouldn't lick you proper. Not a little girly baby like you, but I'll spank you just to learn you to let us come by." John opened his eyes to see a boy, about his own height but broader build, squinting at him through the rain. "Take off your pants, dearie," said the boy in a mock voice, digging in his fingers till John winced. "Joe Buller can handle your captain smart enough. Me, I'll just paddle you to learn you." John looked up, was afraid. He did not know what to do, but without warning his hand acted for him, and he struck at the square face with all his might. A pain shot up his arm, making his elbow tingle, and the boy fell back. John could feel the surprise in that body stock still in the rain, and had an instant of astonished pride. Then panic laid hold of him, and he tried to run, but the other boy jumped on his back. They went down flat in the mud, the older boy on John's shoulders, pummeling him until his head sang, and forcing his face into the track and crying, "Eat it, you lousy little skunk! Eat it, eat it, eat it, eat it!" John could taste the mud in his mouth with a salty taste, and he began to squirm, twisting his head to escape the brown suffocation. He heaved himself behind, throwing the boy unexpectedly forward, twisted around, and kicked with all his might. The boy yelled and jumped back on him, and again they went down. This time the boy bent seriously to business, and this time John realized how it was to be hurt. At the third blow, something burst loose inside, and he screamed. He was crying madly. The other boy was heavier, but John squirmed over his back, and as the brown hand came down at his face, he caught it in both his own and bit with all the strength of his jaws. The hand had a slippery, muddy taste, but in a second it was warm in his mouth, and there was a sick, salt warmth on his tongue. The boy struck him once in the eyes and once in the nose, but John held on and bit. Then the boy howled and tore loose and ran back. There was another stroke of lightning, and John saw him doubled up, holding his hand to his mouth. And he got stiffly up, turned his back to the thunder, and saw his father bent over the other boater, taking off his shoe. John walked up to them. His father's face was bleeding a trickle of blood from the right eye into his beard, but he was grinning. "I'll take his boot for a souvenir," he said. "How'd you come out, Johnny?" "Oh, pretty good. I guess that other fellow won't be bothering us no more," said John, examining the fallen man. He lay half stunned by the water's edge, a smooth, big man with frightened, pale eyes, and one crumpled arm was in the water. John's father looked at the man and then at the boot he had in his hand. "I'd ought to mark him by the rights of it, but he ain't worth the work," the way he lay down. Who'd ever know his name was Buller? Buller. John gazed up admiringly at his big father and studied how the blood ran from the outer corner of the eye and lost its way in the black beard, which the rain had soaked. His father had licked the Western bully proper. "Hey there!" The hail came in a thin, cracking voice. Turning, they saw the lock-keeper, white-bearded, peering at them from under the battered umbrella he held with both hands against the wind. The tails of his nightshirt whipped round the tops of his boots. "Hey there, you! There'll be some down boats by pretty quick, so you want to hurry along now while the level's right." John was aware of his father standing looking down at him. "Shall we tie back by where we be?" asked his father. John felt pains coming into the back of his neck where he had been pummeled, and his knuckles ached. "We can stay here a spell," said his father. "The storm's comin' on again. There'll be bad lightning, I make no doubt." As he spoke there came a flash, and John whirled to see if the other driver boy was still visible. He was proud to see him sitting by the towpath nursing his hurt hand. John did not notice the thunder. He was elaborating a sentence in his mind. He made a hole in the mud with the toe of his boot, spat into it, and covered it the way he had seen his father do at home on a Sunday. "Why," he said in his high voice, eyeing the old Bacanola, "I guess them poor Bezabor farmers will be wantin' them plows for the spring plowing, I guess." "Me, I'm kind of tuckered," said his father, raising his shoulder to loose the wet shirt off his back. "And the rain's commencing, too." John said importantly, "Water never hurt a man. It keeps his hide from cracking." His father jumped aboard. He took his horn and tooted it for the lot. John ran ahead and put back the other boat's team and cried to their own horses to go on. They took up the slack wearily, and presently little ripples showed on the Bacanola's boat, and the lantern showed the shore slipping back. On the stern, George Brace blew a blast for the lock. The old lock keeper was standing by the sluices, drops of water from his beard falling between his feet. The boat went down, and the horses took it out. Ahead, the team and the boat boy left the lantern light and entered once more the darkness. The rope followed, and once more the Bacanola was alone with its own lantern. Presently, though, in a stroke of light, George saw his son beside the boat. "What's the matter? Hey there," he asked. "Say, Pa, will you chuck me your bullwhip here ashore? Them horses is gettin' kind of dozy. They need soapin' proper." "Where's your whip?" "I guess I left it a while back. I guess it was in that kind of scrummage we had. I guess it needs a heavier whip anyhow. I guess a man couldn't spare the time going back for it." "Sure," said George. He reached down and took it from his peg, recoiled it, and tossed it ashore. The boat went ahead, slowly, with a sound of water and of rain falling and of wind.